an Australian all the way from USA. And, he's been just a blessing. He's brought incredible revelation to the life and the heart of our church. And I know further churches and other churches that are here today and well beyond. So, hey, we're standing. It would be appropriate to honor Shane as he brings us around God's word. Let's thank him in Jesus' name.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Oh, you can be seated. It's been so good to spend a couple days together. This has been such a good conference. And GC family, I reckon you guys are awesome. And it's very easy to take what you have for granted, because once you get in the middle of something, it's just very easy to overlook it until you didn't have it. And I'm telling you, you have some of the great leaders in the world here. And to be surrounded by people in this room who've given their life to rule New South Wales is just quite inspiring. And I hold you guys up as exemplary and inspiring people. And I hope that as we've journeyed together, that Jesus got bigger for you since Wednesday. The cross worked better. The resurrection central. Scriptures got bigger, not smaller. Hope you're talking more about the Bible, not less about it. And it's just been such a good journey. After tonight, as always, our table's out there. If you would like anything, the only thing I would ask, because we got to tear everything down tonight, is if you have no intention of getting anything, God bless you. I'll see you next time I'm through. If you know before you leave tonight you're going to grab something, if you would buy first and chat second, that would be awesome, right? Because we got to tear it all down. And so I'm only going to leave it open for about the first 10 minutes. Vicky and I'll be out there, and then we'll tear it down. So if you want something, if you could please come in the first 10 minutes. So I was thinking about the conference. Tonight I want to talk to you about our basic disposition in conflict. I don't want to talk to you about handling conflict in terms of psychologically step 1, 2, 3, 4, although there's a place for that. But actually the 1, 2, 3, 4 starts with a heart condition and a basic disposition in conflict. Now I want to talk about that, but before I do, I asked for a few minutes extra so that I could try to summarize the conference. So what I'm going to try to do right now is I'm going to go through every main session. I wasn't in all the electives. I was doing electives, but I want to summarize the main sections. Here's the problem with a conference like this, is that if we don't take time to meditate upon the application points, even if the what changes, if the how we believe what we believe doesn't change, then we've just traded one thing for another, and that's not compelling at all, right? And so I want to take a second and give this its due time, and I want us to think about each session, and more importantly, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about each session? So this is just, once again, each one of these sentences is my attempt to summarize a 40-minute talk. So if I miss something, grace and peace, okay? But if you could bring that first one up. So 1, salvation isn't simply the forgiveness of sin, but also the freedom from oppression. That hope always flows around suffering, and the water is red. That if we are meant to embrace both sides of the cross, there is the side of the cross that saves us, but there's also the side of the cross that cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? That great faith is not the absence of doubt. Great faith is the presence of profound trust in the perceived absence as well as the profound presence. This is what we are meant to communicate, to be the in-your-face confrontation to injustice and oppression all over the place. If Generosity Church exists for any reasons, it is to be the traumatic, the presence of an experience with God that by which you can never see the world the same after you have that experience. That's what we're talking about. Number 2, this was Ben's session, which I frankly found one of the most profound preaches I've heard in a long time. This afternoon in my free time, I actually spent my free time talking to 2 different friends of mine through this entire message, because that's how I memorize things so I can pinch it later. So I'm serious. It was really, really good. This was Ben's session. This is my summary of Ben's session, that we're to build deeper wells, not higher fences. Who's in, out, right, or wrong is boring and gets trumped by journeying to the center. That distance from the center is less important than the direction of our shoulders towards the center. And if we're pointing people towards the center, we don't need the fence as much as we used to. That would be a compelling culture. Next one, number 3. This was Pastor Darren Bonnell's session, and I found that brilliant as well. Little by little and increase by increase is the process and procedure of growth. We are to do our part by increasing our abilities and capacities to prepare for the suddenly that is God's responsibility. That God will do his part, but we also have to do our part. We cannot absolve ourselves from our part in participating in the infinite possibilities of this story. Then my session earlier today was this. Next slide. This will turn out for my deliverance. Great faith is not found in the absence of suffering. Great faith is found in clean hands, pure hearts, sweet taste in the middle of great suffering. That this will turn out for my deliverance. The idea that we can have enough faith to get out of something is not the point at all. God is not that which invokes faith to get us out of things. God is the presence of that which enters into the suffering and removes a bit of the sting of it. That is what great faith is. And then I started thinking, I wonder if there was one line from the whole conference that just stood out as like a quote of the conference. And I thought of one. Next slide. Some people are just gifted to sit behind a bunch of knobs and make them work. That's the best. Come on. Now that's a conference, man. So, come on. It's the GC way. So tonight, I want to talk to you about the cross and resurrection. But not, yeah, if you could take that down now, I'm going to lose the room. It was meant to be like a moment, you know. I want to talk to you about the cross. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, come on. Absolutely. That hit the mark so good. So I want to talk to you about the cross and resurrection, but not as a doctrinal point that we affirm. Cross and resurrection is not something we're meant to believe in. The cross and resurrection should be more profound than that. It should be a fundamental way of seeing our whole world. And the cross isn't that which has meaning. The cross is that which defies meaning. For the God of the universe to humble himself, allow himself to be executed at the hands of a local government for the sake of all of humanity does not have one meaning. It is something that defies meaning, which is why the New Testament writers, when they were trying to define the meaning of the cross and resurrection, they struggled for language. Like one place it's called the cancellation of debt. In another place, in the most common way, it's called the defeat of death. Actually, that is the number one way that the New Testament defined the meaning of the cross, that death has no sting. Evidently, death has no mastery. It's that kind of things, that death and hell lose their grip on things. In one place, it's called the evidence that God identifies with our suffering. In another place, it's called the confrontation to oppression, which we talked about that. But I want to talk to you about one tonight that I don't think gets enough playtime. And it's not that it's more important than the others, and it's not that it's less important than the others. I just don't hear about this one as much. So I want to spend the entire 40 minutes tonight talking about this. This is Paul trying to put a definition of the meaning of the cross and resurrection for our world and how we treat one another. Here's what he says. This is Ephesians chapter 2. For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man in place of the two, so by making peace, and might reconcile us both to God into one body through the cross, thereby killing the hostility. So one of the definitions of the meaning of the cross for our world, for Paul, was that the cross and resurrection should not be something we believe in, but something we so profoundly connect to that it ends hostility between people. The idea is that the basic gospel message in a nutshell is that while we were hostile to God, God acted with peace towards us. And if while we were hostile to God, God acted with peace towards us, if we don't just believe that, but profoundly connect connect with that behavior, then when someone acts with hostility towards us, the basic disposition in that conflict is peacemaking back towards them. Could you imagine a world where if Christians, just people who claim to be followers of Christ, if they lived in a world where when someone acted with hostility towards them, our basic disposition in conflict back towards them was peacemaking. Now, this sounds vaguely familiar to Jesus' first sermon, okay? First sermon, called the Sermon on the Mount, third line in. Pretty important thing. Watch what Jesus says about this. Next slide. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Really? Is Jesus allowed to do that? Yes. Let's try that again. Is Jesus allowed to do that? Yes. Is Jesus tying our basic disposition in conflict as to whether we'll be known as the Son of God or not? Yes. Yes. Let's try that again. Is Jesus tying our basic disposition in conflict as to whether we'll be known as a child of God or not? Yes. Is Jesus allowed to do that? That is confronting. Let me ask you a question and be honest, and I'll be honest with you. Before I saw this, if I would have handed a blank piece of paper to every person and I said, here's our assignment for tonight. I want you to write down the criteria for being considered a child of God. Where on that list would being a peacemaker have fallen? I got to be honest, it wouldn't have made I don't think it would have made my list. But isn't it funny that something that wouldn't even make our list was the first criteria Jesus gave for what it means to be a child of God? See, we sing songs like, I am a child of God. Really? Are we? What is our basic disposition in conflict? Jesus says, children of God have a basic disposition in conflict that is peacemaking. Now, unless you're thinking, Shane, come on, that's only one verse. Could have been mistranslated, right? Okay, hey, that's actually not a bad question. Here's the thing, right? 34 verses later, in the same sermon, that's called 2 minutes later, he says the same thing, just with different words. If you could bring the slide back up. You've heard it said that you should love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. Twice in the same sermon, Jesus ties our basic disposition in conflict to whether we'll be considered a child of God. Now, there are lots of implications. I want you to notice that is Matthew 5, verse 43. Just note that. That's going to come back later, okay? Matthew 5, verse 43, all right? There's lots of theological implications possible, but I don't care about that right now. What I care about and what I want us to come back to is this. In the most elemental understanding of this passage, can we all agree together that our basic disposition in conflict is very important to Jesus? It's very important to be a Jesus kind of person. Let me illustrate this with a story that actually happened to me in 2013. In 2013, I was invited to study with a top history expert in Israel. He's the guy that taught me about Bethesda and things like this. I had done a conference with his son-in-law. His son-in-law gave him a USB of some stuff. He calls me and says, Shane, I want you to come and preach in my Messianic synagogue, like my kibbutz, you know. And a part of your compensation is I'll take you around Israel and study history with you. Now he said, I want to be clear. He's one of the heads of the ancient Near Eastern history department at the university there. He does the academic stuff. He said, I don't do tourist tours. If you're wanting a tourist sort of thing, you'll be bored. I do academic tours. So as long as you're okay with academia, we'll be fine. I'm like, I'll be fine. He said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll study with you from as early in the morning as you want, and we'll go to it as late at night as you want. You just tell me when you've had enough. So we studied like 14 hours a day for 3.5 days, okay? And this guy was amazing. He's forgotten more than I know, okay? And here's the thing. 10 minutes into day one, 10 minutes into the first day, he showed me something and taught me something that blew my mind, right? And I was so amazed and over the top in my excitement with it that I sort of scared him. Now, let me be clear. I did not want to argue with him or fight. I was amazed, right? But I could see where he thought I might have wanted to argue. Here was my response when he blew my mind. I went, "Really? Really?" Now, I was amazed. Now, let me be clear. I was amazed, right? Didn't want to fight. And let's just be clear. If I argue with a Jewish history expert standing in Jerusalem talking about Jewish history, I'm an idiot. That's one. Two, if we did argue, who's got all the ammunition to beat me? He does, right? Who knows more? Who's forgotten more than I know? He does. I did not want to argue, but that's not what's important. What's important is he thought I did. He thought I wanted to argue, and I'll never forget his response. Here's the guy that had all the arsenal to destroy me in an argument. And here was his response. "Oh, Shane, peace between us is the most important thing. If one of us needs to be wrong, please let it be me." Well, I was confused, which made it worse, because my response to that was, "What?" He said, "Oh, Shane, peace between us is the most important thing. If one of us needs to be wrong, please let it be me. So that if an outsider saw our conversation, may the Christ that holds us together be glorified more than I need to be right about something. So that they can see Christ in us, would you let me be wrong so that they can see Christ in our conversation?" Now, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's a child of God right there. That's a peacemaker. That's the basic disposition in conflict that I'm talking about. So I said, "Did you think I wanted to argue with you?" He said, "Didn't you?" I said, "Okay, first, I sincerely apologize. My tone of voice communicated that I wanted to argue with you. I absolutely did not. And have you ever, even as articulate as I could be in that moment, I couldn't think of anything except metaphors, right? And he speaks English, but he's not an English speaker. So I was like, I was blown away. Well, we're standing in Jerusalem, and he's like, "Who is blowing what?" I said, no. I was amazed, you know? And then I could see his eyes. He was trying to work it out, and his eyes came alive. And he went, "Were you amazed?" I said, "Man, I was amazed." He held his heart, and he said, "Oh, good." Because I knew I was right about that. He said, "But seriously, I don't need to be right about anything more than I would want someone in our conversation to see Christ glorified." Now, that's a child of God. Now, to understand this, Paul calls it the end of hostility. Jesus calls it peacemaking. Now, to understand this, we need to understand how hostility works. And then second, we need to understand how peacemaking works. So first, let's talk about hostility. There's a great story in the Old Testament that's quite long, so I won't read the whole story. I'll just tell the story, and then I'll show you a few verses out of it. I'll tell it well, but it illustrates how hostility works very well. And it's the story of Samson. Let me see if I can tell the story of Samson in 2 minutes, okay? There's this guy named Samson. He's a barbarian. He is impulsive, he's rebellious, he's out of control, he's everything you wouldn't want to be. He's disrespectful to his parents, and here's how the story goes. He falls in love with a Philistine woman, which is a no-no, comes home, tells his parents, "I love a Philistine." They're like, "Please don't love a Philistine, she worships other gods." He says, "I don't care what you think, I'm gonna love who I love." So here's what he did. He sneaks out of his parents' house in the middle of the night to go see his girlfriend, because we've never done that before. On the way there, he evidently gets confronted by a lion. Now, if you sneak out of your parents' house to go visit your girlfriend, a surefire way to get caught is to run into a lion. Evidently, he's armed enough and skilled enough to defeat the lion. He kills the lion, goes and sees his girlfriend, comes comes back home. Later, he's going to do the same thing, and the lion's carcass is laying there rotting. And Samson does the most disgusting thing you could possibly imagine doing. He's a barbarian. He's an animal. He's out of control. He reaches into the dead carcass and pulls out food and eats it. He's disgusting. He ends up at the Philistine's house. Now he shows that he has no social skills. Here's the picture. There's 30 Philistines and 1 Jew. And he goes, I know what I need to do. I need to prove that Jews are smarter than Philistines. That's smart. So here's what he does. He says, I bet I could tell you a riddle and all 30 of your Philistine pea brains put together. I bet you can't guess it. Bet you can't. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to tell you a riddle, right? And all 30 of you can take 7 full days to try to figure it out. I bet you can't. And here's the thing. If you do, I'll owe you 30 pieces of clothes. And if you can't, you'll owe me 30 pieces of clothes. Bet you can't guess, you stupid Philistines. This guy's out of control, right? So they take the bet. He goes, okay, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. I bet you can't guess. I bet you can't guess. Of course they can't guess. He made it up off the top of his head about something only he saw. So 7 days go by and they can't guess. So here's what they do. They go to his fiance and they say, hey, you need to do whatever it is women do to get men to talk when they don't want to talk. Details omitted. So she goes and does whatever it is women do to get men to talk. And he's like, look, okay, I'll tell you, but it's got to be just between us, and it's this sort of thing, right? So he tells her. Of course, she doesn't keep it between them. And at the very last minute, she tells the family. So at the very last minute, they guess the answer to the riddle. Now, if you're the type of person who needs a Bible verse for everything. I need a verse. Where's that in the Bible? I need a Bible verse. Make this one your life verse. This is a direct quote from the book of Judges. It says, after they'd guessed the answer to the riddle, Samson said, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would have never guessed the answer to that. I love that, because there's nothing like a good heifer plowing. Now, here's the thing, right? If you're paying attention to the story, he now owes them 30 pieces of clothes. So instead of admitting, you got me, you plowed with my heifer, and going to the store, buying 30 pieces of clothes and giving it to him, no. He goes and kills 30 of their family members who weren't there. He strips them all naked, brings the 30 pieces of clothes back, and he says, I owe you 30 pieces of clothes. Here's 30 pieces of clothes from your dead family that I just killed. Here you go. This guy's out of control. He's a lunatic. Look, if you lose a bet today and you kill 30 people, you're gonna go to jail for life. Back then, they wrote a book about you. The world's getting better. Here's the thing. He throws them 30 pieces of clothes. They respond by giving his wife to another man and then offering him a little sister. You didn't want to be a woman back then. He responds by burning their fields down. They respond by burning the entire family with fire. Massive overreaction. They then send 1,000 men to kill one. This is massively overkill. To send 1,000 people to kill one is over the top. He then responds by picking up the jawbone of a donkey and killing all of them. They then respond by tricking him with another woman, blinding him, tying him to a donkey's millstone, and having him do the work of a donkey. He then responds by tricking them into tying him to the temple pillars, and he pulls the building down and everybody dies. Now, if you're paying attention to the story, what starts as a joke no one understood escalated into everybody dying. That's called escalation. And if you're here tonight and you're married, you understand this. Have you ever had a fight with your spouse that started about how to cut a tomato? And before you knew it, it escalated into insulting the other person's mother, right? It's like, that's not how you cut a tomato. That's how I cut a tomato. That's not how my mom cuts a tomato. Well, I ain't your mama. Well, I wish you cut a tomato like her. Well, I ain't so fat as her. Now it's on, see? That's how escalation works. Now, escalation and hostility is driven by one belief. And this belief is all over the story, and I want to show it to you. When Paul said the cross was the end of hostility, I think one way to define that is the end of this belief system. Let me show it to you. Next slide. This is, and it's all over the story. I just picked a few. This is Judges 15. I was so sure that you thoroughly hated her, he said, I gave her to your friend. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead. And Samson said to them, this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I'm going to really harm them. Premeditated harm, but he felt like he had a right to do it. That's hostility. That's what drives hostility. When we feel like we have a right to hurt somebody, that drives hostility. And Samson said to them, this time I shall be innocent in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm. That's what drives hostility. Hostility is driven by the internal conviction that I'll be innocent when I premeditatedly harm you because in my mind I think you deserve it. That's the idea. Paul said the cross is the end of that. Because if anybody deserves something, we were acting hostile to God. And in our hostility, God acted with peace back toward us. And we should profoundly change the way we handle conflict. And there's a way I could do this psychologically and give you, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3, and there's a place for that. But tonight I want to talk to you about the basic disposition in conflict should be peacemaking, because peacemakers are the sons of God. What does that mean? It means we die to the thought that we're ever innocent if we premeditatedly harm somebody by treating them how we perceive they deserve, right? And this happens again. Next slide. It's just later in the story. And then the Philistines said, who's done this? And they said, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because we took his wife and gave her to his companion. And the Philistine came up and burned her and her father with fire. Man, these people are barbarians. And Samson said to them, watch this line, if this is what you do, I swear I'll be avenged on you. And after that, I'll quit. In other words, I'm not going to stop till I'm one up. Here's the problem. If I don't stop till I'm one up, and you don't stop till you're one up, everybody dies. And at 4 years old, that's cute. Why are you choking your sister? She touched my toy. Stop touching his toy, stop choking your sister. At 35, people really get hurt. Fellowships of churches get destroyed, not normally from the outside, but by Trojan horses on the inside, by which we let hostility build up. And we believe we actually have a right to hurt our brother or hurt our sister. And all the while checking the bullet point. I believe in the cross and resurrection. So what? So what? The cross and resurrection isn't something we believe in. The cross and resurrection is a fundamental way of seeing our whole world. And it does not allow us to ever think we're innocent when we harm somebody else. Now, if you're more of a linear learner instead of a narrative learner, I did this for you. Next slide. So here's how hostility works. It starts with an offense. That's not how you cut a tomato. You told us a joke we don't understand. There's an offense. Second, there's dehumanizing the adversary. This time I have a right. You're less human than me. I have a right to harm you because of something you've done. Then number 3, there's an unwillingness to take responsibility for our part. What I find amazing about this story is no one ever owns their stuff. Nobody in the story ever owns it. Samson never in the story does Samson go, my bad. I shouldn't have disobeyed my parents. I should have respected them. I should have had respect for the law. I shouldn't eat things out of dead things. Hey, you know what? Honestly, I lost a bet. I killed 30 of your family members. That was over the top. Honestly, my bad. You know what? I burned your entire fields down. Seriously, that was a year's economy. I'm sorry. Hey, you know what? Hey, my bad. My bad. That was over the top. At no point does Samson ever own it, nor do the Philistines. The Philistines are like, you know what? We gave your wife away. You know what? We burned people to death alive. My bad. Our bad. You know what? Sending 1,000 people to kill you, that was over the top. That was over the line, really. You know what? Blinding you, we probably stepped over the line there. Seriously, making you do a donkey's work, nobody owns it. And when no one owns it, it leads to escalation. Right? Next slide. Next slide. Then we hold the other person responsible for the escalation. It goes like this. Since you've acted like this, now I'll act like this. Oh, that's what you're going to do. I'll show you. Hey, I have a right now to hurt you because of something you've done. And that leads to a failure to learn, which leads to repeating the pattern. And around and around and around and around we go. And actually, the kingdom of God is meant to show the world a better way to live. It's not meant to show the world a better set of doctrines. It's meant to show the world a better way to live. What are we doing? So that leads to a couple of observations. Next slide. So the cross wasn't solely about forgiveness and freedom, but also the end of hostility. So in the first session this week, we talked about the freedom part. Tonight, we're talking about the end of hostility. The cross was a physical manifestation of a new way to live. The most loving person acts first to end the hostility. And the New Testament writers claim that the cross was true before the foundation of the world. So evidently, God beats us to the punch every time. That Jesus didn't die to inaugurate a new reality. He died to show us what God was always like. In that sense, Jesus didn't die to fix the sin problem. Jesus died to obliterate the idea there ever was a problem and invite us to embrace something that gracious. This is the end of hostility at the highest possible profound level. This is the cross of Jesus Christ and the finished work. Next slide. So then peacemaking's not passive. It's charging in with a different way and changing lives. It's being intentional about our basic disposition in conflict. Now, so that's how hostility works. Hostility is driven on the belief I have a right to harm you because of something you deserve. But then there's a better way, and that's peacemaking. Now, Jesus said it this way in Matthew 5:43. You've heard it said to love your friends and hate your enemies. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you or who are hostile towards you, so that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. It's Matthew 5, verse 43. Now, Jesus is preaching a sermon. And that is his concluding statement to a three-pronged strategy on how to live at peace when someone's acting hostile. And he's talking to Galilean peasants who were living in an occupied territory by the Roman military, okay? So you thought that person at work was hard? Okay? This is the Roman military occupying your town. And there were things they could do that was horrendous. And how do you live at peace with people doing stuff like that? Matthew 5:43, he says, don't just love your friends, love your enemies, the Romans. Pray for those who persecute you, the Roman soldiers, so that you may be sons of your Father who's in heaven. Now that is the end of a three-pronged strategy. Let me show you the three-pronged strategy. All I did was back up 3 verses, and this is what Jesus says. Next slide. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek. Couple questions about that. One, how are we doing with that? How seriously do we take Jesus? How good are we at turning the other cheek? If someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek. Leads to all kinds of questions like, what is Jesus talking about? Does that actually work? And what's going on? Now, to understand this part, we have to understand first century Roman class systems. Next slide. So in the Roman Empire, they had a 9-layered class system. I could tell you the name of all of them, but that would be boring. So tonight we'll call them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, okay? And there were obvious delineations between them. And here's how it worked. Here's how conflict worked. If I was a class 2 person and you were a class 2 person, we're the same. So if we had conflict, I would hit you with my right hand. It was declaring we have a problem, but we're socially equal. But if we were not socially equal, if I was a class 2 person and you were a class 8 person and we had a problem, I would never hit you with my right hand because it would be declaring we're socially equal. I would hit you with my left hand, literally because it's the hand I wipe my butt with. I'm serious. You're not worth my clean hand. I'm gonna hit you with my poo-poo hand. It's that. It was a physical way to demean the social class or the race of another person. It would be a physical way of using the N-word, for instance. It would be the language we use to demean someone else because of their class or because of their race, but we would be doing it physically. And what I would do is I would hit you with my left hand in front of people. In other words, I am hitting you with my poo-poo hand. I am declaring you are subhuman. You are less human than me. Now notice Jesus' language. He says, if someone strikes you on your cheek, no. If someone strikes you on your right cheek, well, hang on. If I'm going to hit someone on their right cheek, what hand am I going to use? My left hand. In other words, Jesus says, if someone socially degrades you, don't escalate it. Just turn the other cheek. In other words, only present the side of you that makes them address you as an equal, and they will not do it. In other words, if we're going to have this conversation, we will start on equal footing. That is, turn the other cheek. Turn the other cheek is about setting nonviolent boundaries that say you will only treat me as a human being. How do we have peacemakers? We start every conflict with the notion that we're on equal footing because Christ holds us both together. There's not Jew nor Greek, slave nor Greek, male nor female. That we are all one in Christ so that the world can see Christ in us. Let's start, yes, we're having conflict, but let's start this conflict with the notion that we're all on equal footing, right? Here's the next line. Check this out. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. That's weird. Because there's only two pieces of clothes. Jesus says if someone takes your outer cloak, just get naked, right? That's so strange. Now, to understand the first one, we got to understand Roman class systems. To understand the second one, we got to understand Deuteronomy law. Next slide. So in Deuteronomy, if someone sues you and you can't pay, then you could promise, you could give them your tunic as a promise, right? So here's what would happen. There was no such thing as debtor's prison in Hebrew culture. It was a grace thing. If I owed you money and I could acknowledge that I owed you money in front of witnesses and declare my intent to pay by giving you my outer garment, right? Now, that's one part of it. The other part of it was, these people lived in Galilee. By historical estimates, the Galilean peasants were living under 87% taxation. 50% of their grain, 30% of their fish, 12.5% of their total take to Caesar just for the divine privilege of having God rule them. You had the Romans' roads tax to move your goods and services. You had the temple tax, and you had the dodginess of the tax collectors. These people were losing their family land that had been in their family since the book of Joshua. And it was profiteering the Romans and 3% of Jews called the Roman sympathizers. So the Roman sympathizers were making the Roman occupation possible, and they were profiteering on that Roman occupation on the backs of their Galilean brothers and sisters. And then what they were doing is they were still suing the Galilean people, knowing they could not pay, and literally taking the shirt off their back. Jesus says, if someone does that to you, if someone's willing to take your outer cloak, just go ahead and give them everything. Oh, you want my outer cloak after all this? Here, just take it all. Just get naked, right? Why would he say that? Next slide. In Hebrew culture, being naked is not shameful, but seeing nakedness is. So the man being sued is placing his shame on the other while remaining peaceful. The idea is, what kind of person would take both clothes? The idea is you don't confront greed with confrontation. You confront greed with uber generosity. That's how you confront it. Like if you were going to take someone's outer cloak and they started to get naked, at some point you go, whoa. That's how you can, here, just have it back, right? The idea is that if you've ever been at dinner and the waiter says, how are we doing the bill? If one person says split the bill and the other person simultaneously says, I'll take it, what's going to happen? What's going to happen is they're going to both argue over who took the bill. But the truth of it is the greedy man's already played his cards face up. He doesn't want to take the bill. But the generosity of the generous man has confronted the greed in the heart of the greedy man. Jesus is saying the best way to confront greed and oppression is to be over the top generous, right? So how do we be peacemakers? We turn the other cheek. We give our tunic and our cloak. Here's the next line. This is the very next sentence. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2. It's an odd sentence. Force. If someone forces you to go 1 mile. It's weird. Was there like some sort of first century personal trainers? Come on, Willard, 1 more mile, you know? Now to understand the first one, we got to understand Roman classes. Second one, we got to understand Deuteronomy law. Third one, we got to understand Roman military law. See, the Romans were the occupying military, and the Roman military had rules, things they were allowed to do, things they weren't allowed to do. Some of the things they were allowed to do was atrocious, like rape your women, crucify people who wouldn't proclaim Caesar's Lord. Like some of it was crazy stuff. Some of it was more reasonable. Some of it was just weird. But in this case, here was the rule. If the Roman soldiers were going to go on a walk, a march, they carried these 32 kilogram packs, 70 pounds. Now they're not gonna carry their own pack, not when they're surrounded by a bunch of Class 8 lowlifes. No way. They can force you to carry their pack for them. And here was Roman military law. Roman military law said that a Roman soldier could force a Class 8 person to carry their pack 1 mile, but they could never force them to go more than a mile, or they would be court-martialed a day's wage. Why? Why? Because they didn't want those people carrying packs so long that they couldn't go back to work in order to pay more taxes, right? So they could force you to carry 1 mile, but they couldn't force you to go more than a mile. They'd be court-martialed a day's wage. Here's what Jesus says. The next time a Roman soldier forces you to go 1 mile, at the 1 mile mark, take off and go 2. And you'll have a Roman soldier chasing you down. You'll turn the tables by being uber generous. How does hostility work? It works on the idea that I have a right to harm you because of something you've done. Paul said that the cross is the end of that hostility. Jesus said that peacemakers are the children of God. What does peacemaking look like? It looks like we turn the other cheek. We go the extra mile. We give our tunic and our cloak. We don't just love our friends, we love our enemies. We pray for those who persecute us so that we may be sons of our Father who are in heaven. What is a basic disposition in conflict? It's a position that decides before the conflict, I'm gonna address this as if we're equals. I'm gonna confront any greed with uber generosity. I'm gonna go over the top to take the high road. That's our basic disposition in conflict. I'd like to look at one more story before we end. And it's a story that is so weird. It's found at the end of the Gospels, and it's such a strange story. I'm gonna try to summarize it. Essentially, everybody has come from everywhere to eat the biggest meal of the year. That was called Passover. Passover was a gigantic meal. It started at sundown, roughly 6 p.m., and it went for 4 hours, roughly 10 p.m. to 10:30. In the course of the night, you'd have this huge feast and you'd have 4 glasses of wine. So you've walked forever, you've eaten a huge meal, you drank 4 glasses of wine. People are ready to go to bed. Jesus chooses this time to have a prayer meeting, which is weird. And his followers are having a hard time staying awake. And Jesus is irritated. He's like, come on, bro, can you not stay awake for an hour? And they're like, what are you talking about? We walked, we ate, we had 4 glasses of wine, my God, you know? And he's like, come on, I'm sweating blood here. Can you not stay awake for an hour? The Roman soldiers show up. This is the whole scene with Judas' kiss, and they show up with a high priest in training named Malchus. And Malchus is leading the Roman soldiers to arrest Jesus to ultimately kill him because Caiaphas wants him dead. But Caiaphas doesn't lead the charge. That's what you send interns to do. So Malchus is sort of the intern. He's the priest in training, and he's leading the charge to kill Jesus, right? That is as hostile as it gets. Somebody leading the charge to kill somebody, that's massively hostile. And then what happens is really weird. One of Jesus's friends takes out a knife and cuts off the guy's ear. That's strange. It leaves you with all kinds of questions like, was that legal? This guy cuts off a man's ear in front of the police, and the Romans' response was, oh, these crazy Jews, right? Nobody does anything to this guy, and he just chopped a man's ear off his head? How's that possible? Is that legal? And I've asked Christians all over the world, which friend of Jesus cut off the guy's ear? Everybody quickly says, Peter. Why? Like, I think Peter gets a bad rap, you know? Like, Peter has a reputation for being a little crazy. Like, he did things like fish naked, right? That's in the list of things never to do naked. It's up there with don't cook bacon, right? But everybody says, oh, Peter did it. Hang on. Matthew says a certain companion of Jesus. Mark says one of Jesus' friends. Luke says one of Jesus' disciples. Poor Peter. We just sort of, oh, Peter did it. Wait a minute. Matthew says it was one of Jesus' friends. Sorry, one of Jesus' companions. Mark says one of Jesus' disciples. Luke says it's one of Jesus' friends. How do we get Peter out of that? Well, the reason is because John said Peter did it, right? So So Matthew, Mark, and Luke are like, let's keep this on the down low, shall we? John's like, nope, throw him under the bus. Peter did it. Now the question is why is this legal? How does Peter get away with it? Peter's present at the trial later. They don't put him on trial too. Let me see if I can explain this in 60 seconds. In the first century, there was tension between the Pharisees and the priests. Here's why. To be a Pharisee, you had to go through 30 years of training. To be a priest, you had to be born. So there was tension between people who had to earn their way and people who were born with a silver spoon in their mouth. Can we understand that? And here's the thing. What do you do if a priest is wicked? Because all he had to do to be a priest was be born. It's a birthright. Now, it doesn't stand to reason that it's possible to have a righteous priest who gives birth to a wicked son. And you don't want that guy being your representative to God. So what do you do when he's like that? Here's what they did in the first century. They used an obscure law from Leviticus 21. Very obscure. Now, I have copied and pasted this straight from the NIV without changing one word. This is the law they used to disqualify priest. This is Leviticus 21. For no one who has a blemish shall draw near. A man born blind or lame, or one who has a mutilated face. I don't even know how you lived back then. Sir, you are next in line to be the priest, but your face is just a bit mutilated for us. Nope. Or a limb too long. Or a man who has an injured foot, or an injured hand, or a hunchback, or a dwarf, or a man with a defect in his sight, or an itching disease, or scabs. Or crushed testicles. Which leads me to this question, was that ever actually a problem? What kind of barbaric world is that? Hey, Bill, you look a little down. I am. What happened? Oh, these four guys, they got mad at me. They held me down and took 2 bricks. And they crushed my testicles. You know what the worst part about that is? What? I can't be a priest anymore. Would you agree with me that if 4 guys held you down and crushed your testicles, your last concern is whether you could be a priest? Your first thought is, where do I go to die? My other thought on this is, would there be a more awkward job in the history of the world than the priestly inspector? Face, not mutilated. Check. Limbs about the right length. Check. Check. Not a dwarf. Nope. Not a hunchback. Nope. Any scabs we don't know about. Nope. Now, sir, there's just this one more sort of awkward inspection. It's going to be weird for me and you. I don't know. I have a good friend that's in his 5th year of PhD training. He's becoming a Catholic priest, and this year he had to have a doctor's appointment because of this verse. They had to check him out, yeah. It's in the Bible, yeah. Anyway, next slide. No man of the offspring of Aaron the priest who has a blemish shall come near to offer the Lord's food offerings. Since he has a blemish, he shall not come near to offer the bread of his God. So here's what they did. In the first century, they knew they could disqualify priests by giving them a blemish. So what they did, when they deemed a priest unfit for service, they would give them a blemish. And what they would do was far more gracious than some of the options. What they would do is they would mangle their ear. Let me define that. They would hold them down, they would pierce their ear and pull. Now that would hurt. You would get over it. And it's better than option 9 up there. But here's the thing. It would leave you with a forked earlobe that everyone could see. That's a physical blemish. Here's what's going on in the story, and here's why it's illegal. See, my Sunday school teacher, what they would do is, my Sunday school teacher taught me that Peter was trying to cut the man's head off and missed. With respect, that makes no sense. Think about it. If you're trying to cut someone's head off, if you're coming this way, if you're trying to cut someone's head off and you hit them in the ear hole, that's called a direct hit. The head's on the other side, right? What more than likely happened is that Peter came up behind him with a knife and just flicked his ear off. Now, what's more important than any of that is Jesus' response. This man is acting as hostile to God as you can possibly act. And Jesus' response before he went and got beaten and died, hang on, before you beat me and kill me, hold on, I've got someone to love on here. And he reaches down and he picks up his ear and he puts his ear back on. Now, why is that important? Well, it heals his physical thing, but it also restores him back to the temple. See, what Peter's doing is Peter's saying, you're fixing to destroy the real temple. Therefore, you have no right to serve in the temple made with the hands of men, and I'm going to make sure you never do. Jesus is like, put your sword away. We don't act like that, bro. Have you not learned that by now? If you live by escalating hostility, you'll die by escalating hostility. The only way to live the Jesus way is to put their ear back on. And this is the problem with any message of Christianity that says, if you don't do something, Jesus is gonna like, what? No, that is not the message of Jesus. I don't care if there's a 25-foot cross over the top of the building. Jesus' response, people say, you don't understand. Did you see that? They were boycotting the Christian movie. Oh God, right? As if, what? Like the level, this disheartens me so much. I was in Melbourne during the last election, right? And I want to be clear, I'm glad the guy won, okay? That's not what bothered me. What bothered me is the sheer smallness of Christians on how small they must believe God is. These are actual things Christians told me. Oh God, if the other side gets in, they're gonna remove the Lord's Prayer from Parliament House. I'm like, what? Listen, if the Lord's Prayer isn't already active in someone's heart, having it on a plaque isn't helping anybody. Look, let me give you a brief history of the God you serve. The God you serve overcame the watery chaos at creation, overcame the flood, overcame the Egyptian empire, overcame the Babylonian empire, overcame Nebuchadnezzar, overcame Tiglath-Pileser, the Assyrian empire, overcame Antiochus Epiphanes and the abomination of the desolation in 157 BC, overcame Pompey Magnus in 63 BC, overcame the Roman Empire, overcame the Dark Ages. I think he can handle the Labor Party, right? Like God's not in heaven going, oh my, me, what am I gonna do if they win? Ridiculous. Here's what happens, right? If Christianity ever becomes fence builders instead of well diggers, what comes closely behind that is an okayness with chopping people's ears off who aren't within our fence. And when Christianity becomes a movement of ear cutters instead of ear repairers, we've lost the plot. And here's why that's important. Because Sunday, there's gonna be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 visitors at whatever campus you're at. And they're coming to your churches from all over the place with their metaphorical ears in their hands. And here's what they're saying. Someone's disqualified me. Someone says I can't be used. Someone says I'm past the point of no return. Somebody's cut my ear off. Is this the place of clean slates, second chances, fresh starts, mulligans, and the opportunity to write a better story? Because the Church of Jesus Christ should be ear repairers and never ear cutters. How do we make peace? We turn the other cheek. We go the extra mile. We give our tunic and our cloak. And we make a commitment to be ear repairers instead of ear cutters. Now, great sermons are not meant to be agreed with, nor disagreed with. Great sermons are meant to be wrestled with. Let's wrestle. Next slide. Have we received the cross that forgives us while rejecting the cross that ends hostility? And this is why I wanted to end the conference with this talk. Because what's so easy on a Friday night at a conference where everybody's a follower of Jesus, we can absolve ourselves. We go where we're saved, we've received the cross, we accept the cross. Yeah, which part? Hey, have we become guilty of embracing the cross that forgives us, saves us, but then rejected the cross that demands we treat our brothers and sisters with peacemaking? Where have we forgotten that side of the cross? Where have we embraced the cross that gives us mercy? Where have we wanted mercy for ourselves but justice for everybody else? It doesn't work like that. Doesn't work like that. Maybe what GC needs is a reminder that the cross and resurrection is not a belief. It's a fundamental way of seeing the world, and that requires that even if we perceive they deserve it, our basic disposition needs to be peace. Peace. Is there any place we're escalating violence right now? Is there any place we're participating in the escalation? And if I confronted you on it, you'd go, you don't understand what they did, they deserve it. Maybe, but Christianity says whether they deserve it or not, we're never innocent if we purposely harm them. Doesn't work that way. It's a better way to live that we could show the world. Maybe we can say it this way. Where do we need to act first to be a peacemaker? Look, in a room this size, statistically it's improbable there's not at least one marriage in some crazy cycle of escalation. You actually haven't spoken in the whole 2 days you've been here because you want to win the argument that you had in the car on the way here. And you show them. You show them. You just won't speak. Well, somebody has to act first to make peace. And who's going to do that? Whose job is it? The one who's most mature. The one who's most mature will be the one making peace. I realize I just created another competition. No, I'll go first. I'll go, peace. All right. Let's say it this way. Whose ear do we need to repair? Maybe there's someone who needs a phone call, a text, an email. We've taken their ear off their head. And let me be clear. Sometimes you'll do everything you can do to put someone's ear back on and they're not going to have it. But that's on them. They're not going to own it. They're not going to take responsibility. They're not going to do any of that. And that's on them. But I'm not talking about every single time. It's not a guarantee, but our basic disposition should be a willingness to put people's ear back. This has got to, if there's not another place, this has got to be the place of clean slates, second chances, fresh starts, mulligans, and the opportunity to write a better story. Let's say it this way. Jesus gave his life for us. What's our offering going to be back? If you're the type of person that can only remember one line from a message, I don't want it to be the crushed testicle line. So maybe let's remember tonight this way. Next slide. What if the cross was God saying, how far do I have to go for you all to get along? What action do I need to undertake for you to be inspired enough to treat each other kindly? How far do I have to go for the hostility belief to leave you, for you to be delivered from it? You were acting in hostility to me and I died for you. How much further I gotta go? What if the cross was saying, I can't go any further than this to inspire you to live at peace with each other? So my brothers and sisters of GC, may you not just be people on your way to heaven when you die, but may you show the world what it's like to bring heaven here. May we die to the thought of hostility that we're ever innocent in harming somebody because they deserve it. And may we live a life of peacemaking. May we turn the other cheek, go the extra mile, give our tunic and our cloak, and may we be committed to putting people's ears back on their head. So let's just stop and take 20 seconds to think about this. Before we close the conference, I'm sure they're gonna close with a song or something, but I just want us to think and meditate on this. Would you pray this prayer underneath your breath? Lord, give me the courage to see things different, the irresistible urge to respond to what I see. If you're really serious, why don't you pray a prayer like this? Holy Spirit, would you speak to my heart about where I'm escalating violence? Is there any place that I'm being called to be a peacemaker and I'm ignoring it? Would you forgive me for that and give me the courage to act? Is there anybody within Generosity Church culture and you've had hostility towards them and you've justified it? Well, they deserve it. Wait a minute, hold on. Are we ever okay with that? Maybe we need to make that right. You know, Paul took it so serious and Jesus took it so serious He said, even if you're giving an offering and you remember there's hostility between you and a brother, first go make that right and then come back and give your offering. This is serious. Organizations as good as this one, if they ever go down, they normally go down from the inside because people don't deal with hostility. So my brothers and sisters, may we be empowered by the Holy Spirit to not just be going to heaven and believing the right things, but may we show the world what it's like to be children of God. Would you look this way? Thank you so much for letting me be a part of your week. I hope Jesus got bigger. I hope the cross worked better. I hope the resurrection central. I hope scriptures got bigger, not smaller. I bless you to be people who realize the water is red and there's hope flowing through suffering. I bless you to be well diggers and not fence builders. I bless you to increase upon increase, little by little. I bless you to live with the mantra, this will turn out for my deliverance. Clean hands, pure heart, sweet taste. That great faith is not found in the absence of the struggle. Great faith is found in profound trust within it. I bless you to be people who live with the resurrection as your fundamental way of seeing the world. I bless you to be people who die to the thought that we ever have a right to hurt somebody. I bless you to be people brave enough to turn the other cheek, go the extra mile, give your tunic and your cloak, and be committed to putting people's ears back on their head. Thanks for letting me be a part of your world. I know I went 7 minutes over, and I hope you're okay with that. But if not, peace between us is the most important thing. Grace and peace, everybody. God bless.